The wind had a way of remembering things in the mountains. It carried the whispers of old arguments through the pine trees, carried the smell of rain before the clouds ever arrived, and carried the names of people who had been forgotten by everyone except the land itself. For Elara Voss, the mountains had always been the only place that never asked her to apologize for existing. She stood at the edge of a narrow dirt road leading into the small frontier settlement of Blackridge Hollow, one hand resting on the worn leather strap of her travel bag, and the other holding her faded wool shawl tightly around her shoulders. The town sat between towering grey cliffs and endless forests, a place where the winters were cruel, the work was hard, and people learned quickly that survival depended on strength. But Elara already knew something about survival. She had spent most of her life surviving people. The late afternoon sun painted the wooden buildings gold, but Elara barely noticed the beauty around her. Her eyes were fixed on the faces watching her from porches, shop windows, and the dusty street. She knew those looks. She had seen them in every town she had ever entered. The quick glance, the quiet whisper, the judgment that came before a single word was spoken. A woman carrying too much weight, a woman dressed too simply, a woman who did not look like she belonged. Elara Voss had learned long ago that some people could make a person feel unwanted without ever saying a single cruel thing. But Blackridge Hollow was different. At least, she hoped it would be. She had not traveled nearly 200 miles through rough mountain trails just to run away again. This time, she had come to build something, a life, a home, a place where she could finally breathe. Her boots touched the wooden walkway outside the general store, and immediately a few conversations became quieter. A man sitting outside the blacksmith shop looked her up and down. "Well, would you look at that?" he muttered to the older man beside him. "Seems the mountains are bringing in all kinds these days." The older man chuckled. Maybe she got lost. Elara heard them. Of course she heard them. She always did. But she kept walking. She had learned that reacting to every insult was like trying to fight the wind. Exhausting. Pointless. Inside the general store, a bell above the door rang softly. The owner, a middle-aged woman named Martha Bell, looked up from behind the counter. For a brief moment, something like surprise crossed her face. Not because Elara was unusual, because Elara looked tired. Really tired. The kind of tired that settled into a person's bones after too many years of carrying things they were never meant to carry alone. "Can I help you?" Martha asked. Elara offered a polite smile. "I was told there might be work available." Martha studied her. "What kind of work?" "Anything honest," Elara answered. "Cooking, cleaning, sewing, healing. I know herbs. I can help with injuries and sickness." That made Martha pause. "Healing? My mother taught me," Elara said quietly. "And her mother taught her." Martha looked interested for a moment, but before she could respond, another voice interrupted. "Well, that explains it." Elara turned. A tall, narrow-faced woman stood near the shelves, holding a basket of supplies. Her name was Clara Whiteley, and everyone in Blackridge Hollow knew she considered herself the unofficial judge of everyone else's lives. Her eyes traveled over Elara's figure. Not with curiosity, with calculation. "You're not planning to open some kind of medicine shop, are you?" Clara asked. Elara frowned slightly. "I was only asking about work." Clara gave a small laugh. "Well, I suppose a woman your size would need something that doesn't require much moving around." The store became quiet. Martha looked uncomfortable. Elara felt the familiar sting rise in her chest. The old pain, the old humiliation, but she refused to let it show. "I am stronger than I look," Elara said. Clara raised an eyebrow. "I'm sure you believe that." The words were soft, almost polite, which somehow made them worse. Elara picked up her bag. "Thank you for your time." She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, the bell rang again. This time, everyone in the store went silent, because the man who walked in had that effect on people. Caleb Hart, the mountain cowboy. The man people talked about, but rarely approached. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself like someone who had spent years depending only on himself. His dark coat was covered in dust from the trail, his boots worn from hard work, and his expression was as unreadable as the stone cliffs surrounding the town. Caleb was not the richest man in Blackridge Hollow. He was not the loudest. He was not the kind of man who demanded attention. He simply had a presence that made people notice when he entered a room. His eyes moved across the store. They stopped on Elara. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Elara expected the same reaction she always received. A quick judgment, a hidden smile, a look of disappointment. Instead, Caleb simply looked at her, really looked, and that unsettled her more than an insult would have. "You need something?" Martha asked him. "Supplies," Caleb replied. His voice was deep and calm. He moved toward the shelves, but before he passed Elara, he noticed the way she held her bag, the way her shoulders were slightly tense, the way she was trying not to look like she wanted to leave. He understood that look, because he wore it himself. "You new here?" he asked. Elara nodded. "Yes." Caleb glanced toward the door. Blackridge isn't easy on newcomers. A small, humorless smile appeared on her face. "I'm aware." Something about the way she said it made him pause. Not bitterness, not anger, just exhaustion. "You looking for a place to stay?" he asked. Elara hesitated. "I'll find something." "That wasn't what I asked." She looked at him. For the first time that day, someone wasn't asking what she could provide. They were asking if she was all right. And that nearly broke something inside her. "I don't have much money," she admitted. Caleb nodded. "I didn't ask." The store fell silent again. Clara watched them carefully. Everyone knew Caleb Hart was not a man who involved himself in other people's problems. He kept to his ranch, kept to his work, kept everyone at a safe distance. So seeing him speak to a stranger was unusual. Seeing him show concern was almost impossible. "Elara Voss," she said softly. Caleb looked at her. "That your name?" "Yes." He nodded once. "Caleb Hart." "I know." A faint hint of amusement crossed his face. "Everyone knows. They talk about you. Usually not good things." "No," Elara admitted. "Usually not." For the first time, Caleb almost smiled. Almost. Then the door opened again, and an older ranch hand entered carrying a message. "Caleb," the cowboy turned. "What?" "Your brother's asking about the arrangement." Caleb's expression changed. The warmth disappeared. The walls came back up. "What arrangement?" The ranch hand lowered his voice. "The one you mentioned, finding someone to help at the ranch." Elara looked away. She did not want to be involved, but she heard the next words. "Your aunt said you can't keep living like this. The house is falling apart. The place needs a woman's touch." Caleb's jaw tightened. "My house is fine." The ranch hand sighed. "Caleb, you haven't let anyone inside that place in 3 years." Silence. 3 years. Elara noticed the reaction on his face. Pain, hidden quickly, but she saw it. Caleb looked toward her, and for reasons neither of them understood, the moment felt different. A wounded woman who had spent her life being rejected. A wounded man who had spent his life refusing to need anyone. Two strangers standing in the middle of a mountain town where everyone thought they knew their stories, but nobody knew the truth. Not yet. Caleb cleared his throat. "You said you know healing." Elara looked surprised. "Yes." "And you can cook." "Yes." "So?" "Yes." He studied her for another moment. Then he said something that made the entire store freeze. "I have a place at my ranch." Elara blinked. "What?" "You need work. I need help." Clara immediately stepped forward. "Caleb, surely you aren't suggesting," he ignored her. "You'll have your own room, your own pay. No one bothers you." Elara stared at him. It sounded too simple, too good. "What is the catch?" Caleb looked at her. "There isn't one. There always is." For a moment, something passed through his eyes. Something sad, something familiar. "Maybe," he said quietly. "But this one isn't what you're expecting." Elara didn't know it then, but that conversation would become the moment everything changed, because she had arrived in Blackridge Hollow, believing she was searching for a place to survive. She had no idea she had walked into the one place where she would finally be seen. And Caleb Hart had no idea that the woman he offered shelter to would become the person who would force him to open the door he had kept locked for years. The door to his home, and the door to his heart. The offer should have felt like a blessing. But Elara Voss had learned that sometimes blessings came wearing the same clothes as dangers. She stood in the middle of the general store, holding the strap of her worn travel bag, staring at Caleb Hart as if she were trying to figure out what kind of man offered a stranger a home without asking for anything in return. She had met too many people who smiled while sharpening their knives. Too many people who offered kindness only because they expected something back. "I appreciate the offer," Elara said carefully. "But I don't know you." Caleb nodded. "That is fair. And you don't know me. That is also fair. You don't know if I can actually do the things I claim I can do." His eyes remained steady. No. The honesty caught her off guard. Most people would have rushed to convince her. Most people would have said something charming. Instead, Caleb simply accepted the truth. "No?" she repeated. "No," he said. "I don't know you. But I know what it looks like when someone is trying to survive." The words landed harder than she expected, because that was exactly what she had been doing. Surviving, not living, not dreaming, just surviving. Caleb glanced toward the window where the last orange light of evening spilled across the dusty street. "My ranch is about 4 miles outside town. The work is honest. The pay is fair. If you don't like it, you can leave whenever you want." Elara studied him. "You say that like you've already decided." "I have." "Why?" For the first time, Caleb hesitated. It was only for a second, but Elara noticed. Because she had spent years noticing the things people tried to hide. "My mother used to say that people who have been hurt recognize pain in others," he finally answered. Something shifted in his expression. A memory, a wound. Then it disappeared. Elara lowered her eyes. She knew something about carrying old ghosts. "All right," she said quietly. Caleb looked at her. "All right? I'll try." A strange silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. Because neither of them was used to trusting someone so quickly. Outside, the townspeople watched through windows and doorways as Elara stepped out of the store beside Caleb Hart. And within minutes, the whispers began. They always did. That was fast. What business does Caleb have bringing her to his ranch? She probably planned this. She must have known he was lonely. She'll ruin his reputation. Elara heard every word. She always did. But this time, something was different. This time, she wasn't standing alone. Caleb noticed the whispers too. His expression hardened. "Don't listen to them." Elara looked at him. Easier said than done. He was quiet. Then he said something she didn't expect. "You don't owe anyone in this town an explanation." She gave a small smile. "That sounds like something a man who doesn't care what people think would say." "I care." The answer surprised her. Caleb looked ahead as they walked toward the horses waiting near the edge of town. "I just learned a long time ago that caring doesn't mean letting everyone else decide who you are." Elara looked at him. There was sadness behind those words. A sadness she recognized. "You learned that the hard way?" "Yes." She waited, but he didn't explain. And somehow, she respected that. Some wounds needed time before they became stories. The ride to Caleb's ranch was quiet. Not an uncomfortable quiet, a peaceful one. The mountains stretched around them, endless and beautiful, with tall pine trees covering the slopes like a green ocean. Elara had traveled through many places, cities full of noise, towns full of people, places where everyone knew everyone's business. But she had never seen anything like this. Caleb's ranch sat in a valley surrounded by mountains. It was not a grand place. It wasn't impressive in the way wealthy homes were impressive, but it had something else. Warmth. The wooden farmhouse was weathered but cared for. A small barn stood nearby. A creek ran behind the property, its water shining beneath the fading sunlight. "This is beautiful," Elara whispered. Caleb looked surprised. "It's just a ranch." "No," she said softly. "It's someone's home." For some reason, those words made him look away. They reached the house as the sky turned dark. Caleb helped her down from the horse, not because she couldn't do it herself, He could see she was perfectly capable, but because it was the polite thing to do. And Elara noticed. She noticed everything. Inside, the house was exactly what she expected. And nothing like what she expected. There was no warmth from a woman's touch, no flowers, no decorations, no signs that anyone had truly lived there happily. The furniture was simple, the walls were bare, the fireplace was cold. It was a house, but it felt lonely. Elara slowly looked around. When was the last time someone cooked here? Caleb frowned. I cook. She looked toward the kitchen. There was a single pan hanging on the wall, a stack of plates, a bag of flour, and almost nothing else. You heat food, she corrected gently. A tiny flicker of amusement crossed his face. Is there a difference? Yes. She walked toward the kitchen. Cooking means someone cared enough to make something. Caleb watched her. There was no judgment in her voice, no criticism, just observation, that somehow bothered him more, because she was right. The house had become a place where he slept, not a place where he lived. I'll show you your room, he said. The room was small but clean. A bed, a wooden dresser, a window overlooking the mountains. Elara placed her bag down carefully. This is more than enough. Caleb stood at the doorway. You don't have to pretend. She turned. What? You don't have to act grateful because someone finally offered you something. The words were not cruel, but they hit close. Elara looked away. I am grateful. I believe you. Then why say that? Caleb leaned against the doorframe. Because I know what it looks like when someone thinks they don't deserve better. The room became very quiet. Elara swallowed. You know nothing about me. No. His voice softened. But I know that a person who walks 200 miles alone, with nothing but a bag and determination, is not someone who should be begging anyone for permission to exist. For a moment, Elara couldn't speak. Nobody had ever said something like that to her. Not once. People had called her many things. Too much, too large, too stubborn, too old, too difficult, but never strong, never brave, never enough. She looked down quickly so he wouldn't see the emotion in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Caleb nodded once. Dinner is at 7. Then he turned to leave. Mr. Hart? He stopped. Yes? She hesitated. Why did you really hire me? The question hung between them. Caleb didn't answer immediately. Finally he said, because my house has been quiet for too long. Then he walked away. Elara stood alone in the room, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder if maybe this place could become something more than another temporary shelter. Maybe it could become home. But she didn't know yet that Blackridge Hollow was already preparing to fight against her. Because by morning, the rumors would grow louder, and someone from Caleb's past would arrive, carrying a secret that could destroy everything before it even began. The first night at Caleb Hart's ranch was quieter than Elara expected. Almost too quiet. For most of her life, silence had meant loneliness. It meant empty rooms, closed doors, and the feeling that nobody would notice if she disappeared. But this silence was different. The kind of silence that came from mountains, sleeping beneath the stars. The kind of silence where a person could finally hear their own thoughts. Elara sat near the small bedroom window, looking out at the dark outline of the pine trees swaying in the cold night wind. She should have been afraid. A strange house, a strange man, a new town where people already seemed determined to dislike her. Yet somehow, sitting there, she felt something she had not felt in years. Peace. She touched the edge of the blanket on the bed. It was simple, nothing fancy. But it was clean, and it was hers. For now. That thought almost made her laugh. For now. She had become so used to losing things that she struggled to believe anything could truly belong to her. A home, a job, a place beside people who didn't look at her like she was some kind of mistake. A quiet knock came at the door. Elara turned. Yes? The door opened slightly. Caleb stood there holding a small wooden box. I found this in the storage room. He stepped inside and placed it on the dresser. What is it? Medical supplies. Elara looked surprised. You kept these? My mother was sick for a long time, he explained. She believed every house should have things like this. His voice changed slightly when he mentioned his mother. Softer, more careful. Elara noticed. What happened to her? Caleb looked toward the window. She passed away. I'm sorry. He nodded. Thank you. Another silence settled between them, but this one carried something heavier, shared understanding. Because grief recognized grief. You miss her, Elara said. Caleb looked at her. Yes. You don't talk about her much. No. Why? His expression became guarded. Because sometimes talking about someone makes you realize how much you lost. Elara looked down. She understood. More than he knew. My father died when I was young, she said quietly. My mother followed years later. Caleb looked back at her. You were alone. For a long time. What happened? Elara smiled faintly. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind people wore when they had survived something they never wanted to remember. I learned that being alone teaches you many things. Like what? She looked at him. How to fix broken things. Caleb waited. How to grow food from almost nothing. She paused. How to make medicine when there isn't a doctor nearby. Another pause. And how to stop expecting people to stay. The last sentence hung between them. Caleb's expression changed. Not much, but enough. Because he understood that one. I'll see you tomorrow, he said. Elara nodded. Good night, Mr. Hart. He started to leave, then stopped. Elara. She looked up. Yes? You don't have to call me Mr. Hart. A small smile touched her lips. What should I call you? Caleb. She considered it, then nodded. All right? He left, and for some reason, hearing her say his name stayed with him longer than it should have. The next morning came early. Mountain mornings had no patience. The sun barely touched the valley before Elara was awake. Years of hardship had trained her body to wake before anyone else. She dressed quietly and walked into the kitchen. She expected to find Caleb already working. Instead, she found something surprising. The man who seemed capable of surviving anything was standing over a pan of eggs, looking completely defeated. Elara stopped in the doorway. Caleb noticed her. Don't say anything. She looked at the pan, then at him. I wasn't going to. You were. I was thinking it. A small smile appeared on his face before he could stop it. You always this honest? Usually. That must make things difficult. It does. She walked toward the kitchen. What are you trying to make? Breakfast. I can see that. He looked at the eggs. They were supposed to be better. Elara looked closer. The eggs were burnt. The bread was hard. And whatever was in the pot beside him was something she decided not to identify. She covered her mouth. Caleb narrowed his eyes. Are you laughing? No, you are. I am not. You are. And then, unexpectedly, Elara laughed. A real laugh. Not a polite one. Not one she forced because someone expected it. A genuine laugh that filled the quiet kitchen. Caleb stared at her, because he realized something. He had never heard laughter like that in his home. Not in years. Elara suddenly became aware. She stopped. I'm sorry. For what? I didn't mean to laugh at you. Caleb shook his head. You weren't. He looked at her. You were just laughing. The simple statement made her chest tighten, because she realized something painful. She had forgotten what that felt like. To laugh without worrying how she looked. To exist without apologizing. I'll make breakfast, she said softly. Caleb stepped aside. I figured you would. She glanced at him. That confident? No. A pause. I just know when I'm losing a battle. She smiled. Smart man. Within an hour, the kitchen smelled completely different. Warm bread, fresh herbs, eggs cooked properly, a small pot of stew that Caleb insisted was unnecessary, but secretly took a second helping of. He sat at the table watching her, not because he was suspicious, because he was confused. The house felt different. It was the same walls, same furniture, same old wooden table, but somehow it felt alive. You do this everywhere you go? He asked. Elara looked up. Do what? Make a place feel like someone lives there. She looked down. I suppose. Why? She thought about it. Because everyone deserves somewhere they can feel safe. Caleb became quiet. Those words stayed with him. Everyone deserves somewhere they can feel safe. He wondered if Elara believed that applied to herself too. He doubted it. After breakfast, Elara began organizing the house. Not because Caleb ordered her, he never did, but because she needed to feel useful. It was an old habit, a survival instinct. If she worked hard enough, maybe people wouldn't regret letting her stay. By afternoon, she had cleaned the kitchen, repaired torn curtains, and organized the medical supplies. She was outside hanging washed blankets when she heard horses approaching. 3 riders entered the ranch. Caleb, who had been repairing a fence nearby, immediately straightened. Elara noticed the change. The relaxed man from breakfast disappeared. This was the guarded cowboy everyone talked about. The leader of the group was a man around Caleb's age, with sharp features and expensive clothing. He dismounted slowly. Caleb. The tone wasn't friendly. Ethan. Elara looked between them. They knew each other, but not happily. Ethan's eyes moved toward her, then stopped. A slow smile appeared. So this is her. Caleb's expression hardened. Elara Voss. Ethan looked her over. Not openly cruel, but not kind either. Well? He laughed quietly. I expected something different. Elara said nothing. She had heard that sentence in different forms her entire life. I expected something different. Meaning, I expected someone prettier, someone smaller, someone easier to accept. Caleb stepped forward. Choose your next words carefully. Ethan raised his hands. Relax. But his eyes remained cold. I'm only surprised. About what? That you finally let someone in. The words were directed at Caleb, not her. And somehow that was worse, because Elara realized this man knew exactly where Caleb's wounds were. Ethan looked back at her. Be careful, Mrs. Voss. Elara frowned. I'm not his wife. Ethan smiled. Not yet. Caleb's face changed instantly. Elara is here to work. Of course. Ethan mounted his horse. But everyone in this valley knows a lonely man and a lonely woman rarely stay strangers for long. Caleb stepped forward. That's enough. Ethan laughed. Still protecting everyone except yourself, I see. Then he turned his horse away. Before leaving, he looked back at Elara. Welcome to Blackridge Hollow. His smile faded. Just remember, this mountain keeps old secrets buried. Then he rode away. Elara watched him disappear down the trail. A strange feeling settled over her. A warning. A question. A sense that she had not simply arrived at Caleb Hart's ranch. She had stepped into a story that had started long before she ever came. And somewhere in those mountains was a secret waiting to be uncovered. A secret that would test everything. Her courage, Caleb's trust, and the fragile connection beginning to grow between 2 people who had spent their entire lives believing they were meant to stand alone. That evening, the mountains seemed quieter than usual. Elara noticed it the moment the sun began disappearing behind the tall peaks. The air changed first. The wind became colder, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth through the valley. Then the birds grew silent, as if even the creatures of the mountains knew when something was unsettled. She stood outside the farmhouse, folding the last of the clean blankets she had washed earlier. But her thoughts were not on the work in her hands. They were on Ethan's words. This mountain keeps old secrets buried. She had heard enough secrets in her lifetime to know that they were rarely harmless. Secrets were the things people buried because they were ashamed of them, or because they were afraid of what would happen if the truth came out. She glanced toward the barn, where Caleb was finishing his work. He had barely spoken since Ethan left. That alone told her something was wrong. Caleb Hart was not a man who filled silence with unnecessary words. He seemed comfortable with quiet, almost too comfortable. But this was different. This was the kind of silence that came from someone trying to keep a door closed, a door that someone else had just tried to open. Elara carried the folded blankets inside and found Caleb sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of untouched coffee. You know, she said gently, most people drink coffee after making it. His eyes lifted. For a second, confusion crossed his face. Then he looked down at the cup. I forgot. Elara smiled slightly. That seems impossible. It happens. To you? Yes. She placed the blankets on a nearby chair. That surprises me. Why? Because you seem like the kind of man who remembers everything. Caleb looked at her. Why would you think that? Because you notice everything. He was quiet. She continued. You noticed I was uncomfortable in town. A pause. You noticed I was trying not to cry. Another pause. You noticed I needed a place before I asked. Caleb looked away. You pay attention. It was not a question. It was an observation. And somehow, that made him more uncomfortable. Most people saw Caleb Hart as a cold man, a difficult man, a man who did not care. But Elara had seen something else. She had seen a man who cared too much, and had convinced himself that caring was dangerous. You and Ethan have history, she said. Caleb's jaw tightened. Yes. Bad history? Yes. She waited. Caleb looked at her. You always this patient? Elara shrugged. Usually. That must be frustrating. It is. For the first time that day, a small smile touched his face. Small, almost invisible, but real. Then it faded. Ethan grew up here, Caleb said. His family owns the biggest ranch on the other side of the valley. Are you two enemies? No. The answer came quickly, too quickly. Elara noticed. Friends? Caleb looked at the dark window. We were. The past tense carried weight. What happened? Caleb leaned back in his chair. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, my brother died. The room changed. The words were quiet. But heavy. Elara lowered herself into the chair across from him. I'm sorry. He was younger than me. Caleb stared at the table. Everyone thought I was supposed to be the strong one, the responsible one, the one who knew what to do. His fingers tightened around the coffee cup. But I didn't. Elara listened. She did not interrupt. I made a mistake. The confession was barely above a whisper. One mistake. The sadness in his voice was something she understood. Not because she knew what happened, but because she knew what guilt sounded like. Caleb! He looked up. You don't have to tell me. I know. But, he looked toward the fireplace. But I think maybe I should. The fire crackled softly. 3 years of silence were beginning to crack. My brother, Daniel, was reckless, always chasing some adventure, always thinking nothing bad could happen to him. A faint smile appeared. He was annoying. Elara smiled too. That sounds like love. It was. Caleb looked down. The night he died, there was a storm, a bad one. He went out looking for a lost horse. He paused. I told him not to go. Elara stayed still. I told him he was being stupid. The regret in his voice deepened. And he laughed. Caleb swallowed. He said I worried too much. The room became silent. He never came back. Elara felt a heaviness in her chest. What happened? An accident. He looked at her. But accidents don't feel accidental when you spend every day thinking about what you could have done differently. Elara understood then. Caleb was not a man who hated people. He was a man afraid of losing them. So he had decided the safest thing was never to need anyone. You blamed yourself. Yes. Even though you couldn't control it. His eyes met hers. You sound very certain. I am. Why? Elara looked down at her hands. Because I know what it feels like to carry blame that was never yours. Caleb studied her. What happened? She hesitated. For the first time since arriving, she considered telling someone. The truth. Not the simple version. Not the version she gave strangers. The real one. I had a sister. Caleb remained quiet. She was younger than me. Elara's voice softened. She was sick, often. Weak lungs. The kind of sickness that makes a child look smaller than they are. A sadness crossed her face. My parents did everything they could, but medicine was expensive. We didn't have much. Caleb listened carefully. One winter, she got worse. Elara stared at the floor. I walked 6 miles through snow to find a doctor. Her voice shook slightly. When I got back, she was gone. Caleb said nothing. I spent years thinking if I had walked faster. She stopped. The sentence was unfinished, but he understood. You blamed yourself. Yes, even though you were just a child. Elara looked up. His words were gentle, not pitying, just true. That doesn't stop the guilt. No, Caleb looked at her, but maybe it should. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Two people who had spent years punishing themselves for things they could not change. Two people who understood each other's wounds without needing every detail. Then Caleb quietly said, "You know, most people would have left after meeting Ethan." Elara looked confused. Why? Because he was warning you. He was trying to scare me. Yes. And? Caleb raised an eyebrow. And you aren't scared? Elara considered the question. I am. The honesty surprised him. But fear isn't always a reason to leave. Something about that answer stayed with him, because it sounded exactly like something his mother would have said. The next morning, Blackridge Hollow woke up with a new rumor, and this one spread faster than any before. By the time Elara entered town with Caleb to purchase supplies, everyone already knew. The stranger woman was living with Caleb Hart, and people had decided they knew why. The whispers followed them through every street. Some were subtle, some were not. A group of women standing outside the dress shop stopped talking when Elara passed. One of them smiled falsely.
Good morning.
Elara nodded politely.
Good morning.
The woman looked at Caleb.
How nice of you to help someone in need.
The way she said it made the meaning clear. Caleb stopped walking. Elise. The woman smiled. Yes? Choose another conversation. Her smile faded. I only meant, I know exactly what you meant. Elara touched his arm lightly. A small gesture, but it made him stop. She looked at him. It's all right. Caleb looked angry. Not at her. For her. They don't deserve your attention. Elara gave a quiet smile. Maybe not. Then she looked around at the people watching. But I spent my whole life letting other people decide what I was worth. She adjusted the supplies in her arms. I don't intend to continue. Caleb looked at her, and something inside him shifted, because the woman everyone saw as fragile was standing there stronger than anyone around her, not because she never hurt, because she hurt and kept standing. But just as they reached the edge of town, a young boy came running down the street. Caleb! He stopped in front of them, breathing heavily. What happened? The boy looked worried. It's your ranch. Caleb's expression changed. What about it? There was someone there. Who? The boy swallowed. I don't know. A pause. But they were looking through your house. Caleb went still. Elara felt the air change, because suddenly this was no longer about rumors. Someone had come to the ranch, someone searching for something. And deep in her heart, Elara knew one thing. Whatever secret Caleb Hart had been trying to bury, someone else was trying to dig it up. Caleb did not wait for another word. The moment the boy finished speaking, he was already moving. The calm, patient man who had stood beside Elara in town disappeared, replaced by someone sharper, someone whose instincts had been carved by years of living in a place where danger did not always announce itself. Show me, Caleb said. The boy nodded quickly and ran back toward the horses. Elara watched Caleb follow. Something in his expression worried her, not fear, something deeper, recognition, as if some part of him had been expecting this day to come. She stepped forward. I'm coming with you. Caleb stopped. No. The answer was immediate. Too immediate. Elara crossed her arms. That wasn't a request. His eyes narrowed slightly. You don't know what you're walking into. Neither do you. I know enough. And I know enough to understand that you're not telling me everything. The words caught him, because she was right. Again. Caleb looked around at the people watching them. The entire town was already paying attention. He lowered his voice. Elara. There was something in the way he said her name. A warning. A plea. She softened slightly. I'm not trying to make your life harder, Caleb. I know. I'm trying to help. I know that too. Then why are you fighting me? For a moment, he had no answer. Because the truth was simple. He was not fighting her. He was fighting the fear that something would happen to her because she was close to him. He had already lost one person he loved. He refused to lose another. But he couldn't say that. Not yet. Because people around me get hurt, he finally said. The honesty surprised both of them. Elara looked at him carefully. That is what you believe. Yes. Or what you have convinced yourself is true. Caleb looked away. The boy returned with the horses before he could answer. The ride back to the ranch was faster than the ride into town. The mountain trail blurred beneath them. Elara rode beside Caleb, watching the tension in his shoulders. He was not simply worried about someone breaking into his home. He was worried about what they might find, or what they might take. When the farmhouse came into view, Caleb immediately noticed something was wrong. The front door was open. He had locked it. He dismounted quickly. Elara, stay here. She ignored him. Of course she did. He looked back. You really don't listen, do you? She stepped down from her horse. You really don't understand that telling me to stay behind makes me want to follow you more. Despite everything, a tiny bit of amusement crossed his face. You are difficult. I have been told worse. The answer was casual, but he heard the truth beneath it. People had said worse. Much worse. Together, they entered the house. The first thing Elara noticed was not the broken lock, not the papers scattered across the floor, not the open drawers. It was Caleb. His entire body had gone still. She followed his gaze. On the wall above the fireplace was an old photograph, a photograph that had been knocked to the floor. Caleb picked it up slowly. It showed 3 people, a younger Caleb, a younger man who looked almost identical to him, and a woman standing between them, his family. Elara watched the pain cross his face. Is this about your brother? Caleb didn't answer. He walked toward the desk. The drawers had been emptied. Someone had searched through every document, every letter, every piece of paper. They were looking for something, he said. Elara moved closer. What? I don't know, but she noticed something. He wasn't looking at the mess. He was looking at one specific place, the bottom drawer of the desk. The one that had not been opened, or rather, the one that had been opened and carefully closed again. Elara noticed too. Caleb, he looked at her. That drawer. His face changed, slowly. You shouldn't have noticed that. She raised an eyebrow. You are beginning to learn that I notice things. He walked to the desk. His hand rested on the drawer. For several seconds he did nothing. Then he opened it. Inside was an envelope. Old, yellowed, with his name written across the front. Caleb Hart. His fingers tightened. I thought this was gone. Elara looked at him. What is it? He didn't answer. Instead, he opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, a single page. He read the first few lines, and all the color drained from his face. Caleb? He handed it to her. Elara hesitated. Then she read. The handwriting was neat, careful, the kind of handwriting belonging to someone who chose every word. Caleb, if you are reading this, then something has happened that I feared would happen one day. You need to know the truth about Daniel's death. Elara stopped. Her eyes lifted. Caleb was staring at the floor. She continued. Your brother did not die because of an accident. The room felt colder. He was trying to uncover what they had done, and they knew. They knew he was getting close. The letter continued. I should have told you sooner, but I was afraid. Fear makes cowards of good people. There are men in this valley who will do anything to protect their wealth and their secrets. Daniel found proof. Proof that could destroy powerful people. Before he could show you, they stopped him. Elara lowered the letter. Her heart was beating faster. Caleb looked at her. Keep reading. She did. The final lines were written differently, as if the person writing them had been rushed. Caleb, I am sorry. I should have protected both of you. Your brother loved you more than anything. He wanted you to know he never blamed you. Never. The letter ended there. No signature. No explanation. Nothing. Just unfinished words. Elara looked up. Who wrote this? Caleb took the letter back. My father's old friend. Why didn't you see it before? Because I thought it was destroyed. Who had it? He looked toward the broken door. I don't know. A cold feeling moved through the room. Because whoever broke in had not come for money. They had not stolen anything valuable. They had searched for this. This letter. This truth. Elara, Caleb said quietly. She looked at him. You need to leave. She frowned. What? This isn't your fight. She stared at him. Someone broke into your home. Yes. Someone is hiding something about your brother. Yes. And you think I'm going to walk away? Yes. The answer was so certain she almost laughed. Why? Because this is dangerous. So? His expression hardened. So I don't want you involved. Elara stepped closer. Caleb. No. His voice was sharper now. I mean it. She looked at him. You don't get to decide that for me. I do if it keeps you safe. The words came out before he could stop them. Silence followed. Elara looked at him, really looked at him, and suddenly she understood. This wasn't about control. It wasn't about thinking she was weak. It was fear, pure and simple. You think protecting someone means carrying everything alone. Caleb said nothing. You think if you push everyone away, nothing bad can happen to them. His jaw tightened. Elara. But, Caleb, her voice softened. That isn't protection. He looked at her. That is loneliness. The words hit harder than any argument could have, because somewhere deep inside, he knew she was right. He had spent 3 years building walls, 3 years convincing himself that being alone was safer. But now this woman had walked into his life, carrying her own scars, and somehow she was the first person who saw the truth. Not the cowboy, not the ranch owner, not the strong man everyone expected. Just Caleb. A man who was tired, a man who was hurting, a man who was afraid. Before he could answer, a sound came from outside. A branch breaking. Both of them froze. Caleb immediately reached for his gun. Elara! This time, she listened. Not because she was afraid, because she trusted him. And they moved quietly toward the window. Outside, among the trees, a figure stood watching the house. Only for a moment. Then the person disappeared into the darkness. Caleb stepped outside, but whoever it was had already vanished. On the ground near the edge of the property was something left behind. A small piece of paper. Caleb picked it up. His face changed when he read it. Elara stepped closer. What does it say? He looked at her, and for the first time since she met him, she saw fear. Real fear. The kind that came from knowing the past had finally found him. The note contained only one sentence. You should have let the dead stay buried. And beneath those words was a symbol. A symbol Caleb recognized. A symbol he had not seen since the night his brother died. Caleb stood in the darkness outside the farmhouse, the small piece of paper trembling slightly between his fingers. Not because he was afraid. At least, that was what he wanted to believe. But Elara had seen enough of life to understand something important. Fear did not always look like panic. Sometimes fear looked like a man standing perfectly still. Sometimes it looked like a person trying desperately not to remember. And Caleb Hart was remembering. The symbol carved beneath the warning was simple, a circle broken by 3 sharp lines. Elara watched his face carefully. You know that mark? Caleb did not answer. Caleb. His eyes stayed fixed on the paper. Yes. What is it? He folded the note slowly and placed it inside his coat. Something from a long time ago. That doesn't sound like an answer. It is the only one I have right now. Elara studied him. Normally, she would have pushed. She was not someone who gave up easily. But she also knew the difference between someone refusing to speak and someone trying to find the courage to do so. Caleb walked back toward the house. She followed. Inside, the warmth of the fireplace felt strangely distant. The farmhouse that had felt peaceful only days before now felt different, like something unseen had entered through the broken door, something that had been waiting. Caleb locked the door carefully, then checked every window. Elara watched. You think they will come back? Yes. The answer was immediate. That worried her. You are very certain. I know the kind of people who leave warnings. Who are they? Caleb turned. For a moment, she thought he might finally tell her everything. Instead, he said, people who believe they own this mountain. Elara frowned. People with money? Money. A pause. Power. Another pause. And no fear of consequences. The fire popped softly. Elara sat down at the table. Tell me about Daniel. Caleb looked at her. My brother? Yes. Why? Because whoever did this is connected to him. Caleb remained silent. Elara, I am not asking because I am curious. She looked at him. I am asking because someone died, and everyone decided it was easier to live with a lie than search for the truth. Something in her voice made him stop. Because that was not just about Daniel. It was about her too. Her whole life, people had looked at her and decided they knew her story. They saw her size and assumed they knew her strength. They saw her quietness and assumed weakness. They saw her kindness and assumed she could be used. Elara knew what it felt like to have the truth buried beneath someone else's judgment. Caleb pulled out a chair. He sat across from her. My brother was different from me. How? He believed people were mostly good. A small smile crossed his face. He talked too much. Trusted too easily. Always wanted to help. Elara smiled faintly. He sounds kind. He was. Caleb looked down. That was his problem. No. Elara's voice was gentle. That was his gift. Caleb looked at her. He died because of it. He died because someone chose to hurt him. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Caleb looked away. For years, he had blamed himself. It was easier than accepting the truth, because if it was his fault, then maybe there was something he could have done differently. But if someone else had chosen to take Daniel away, then the world was a much more frightening place. What did he find? Elara asked. Caleb took a long breath. I don't know, but the letter said he found proof. Yes, proof of what? He stared into the fire. There was a mining company trying to buy land around here. Elara listened. People thought they were just expanding, building new operations. But Daniel found records. What kind of records? Payments. Caleb's voice lowered. Payments to officials. Payments to inspectors. Payments to people who were supposed to protect the town. Elara's expression changed. So they were hiding something. Yes. And Daniel discovered it. Yes. The room became silent. And you think they killed him? Caleb did not answer. He did not need to. Elara understood. She reached across the table, not touching him, just placing her hand nearby. A quiet offer. You have carried this alone for 3 years. Caleb looked at her hand. I had to. No. His eyes lifted. You chose to. The words were not cruel. They were honest. And honesty from Elara somehow felt different. Because she never used truth as a weapon. She used it like a lantern, to help someone find their way. Before Caleb could respond, a loud knock came from the front door. Both of them froze. It was late. Too late for visitors. Caleb stood immediately. Stay here. Elara gave him a look. You know that never works. Despite the situation, the corner of his mouth moved slightly. You are impossible. So I have been told. He approached the door. His hand rested near his gun. Who is it? A voice answered. Caleb. The color left his face. Not much, but enough. Elara noticed. Who is it? He did not answer. The voice came again. Open the door. Caleb whispered one word. Evelyn. Elara looked at him. The name meant something. Someone from his past. Someone important. Caleb opened the door slowly. A woman stood outside. She was older than Elara, perhaps in her late 40s, with tired eyes and a worn coat covered in rain. The moment she saw Caleb, tears filled her eyes. You look just like your father. Caleb stared. What are you doing here? The woman looked past him. Her eyes landed on Elara. For a moment, confusion crossed her face, then concern. You brought someone into this house. Caleb stepped slightly in front of Elara. She is staying here. The woman looked at him. Caleb. Something in her tone changed. Warning. Fear. You don't understand what you have done. Elara stood. Who are you? The woman looked at her. My name is Evelyn Cross. She looked back at Caleb. I knew your brother. Caleb went still. You knew Daniel? Yes. Why didn't you tell me? The woman's face tightened. Because I was afraid. Of what? She looked toward the dark mountains behind the house. Of the same people who just left that message. The fire cracked. Nobody moved. Evelyn stepped inside and closed the door. Then she reached into her coat and pulled out a small leather journal. Caleb stared. "What is that?" Her hands shook. "Something your brother gave me the night before he died." Caleb slowly approached. "Why would he give it to you?" "Because he knew someone was following him." She handed it to him. "He told me if anything happened to him, I needed to make sure this reached you." Caleb took the journal. His fingers tightened around it. "You had this for 3 years." Evelyn looked down. "I was scared. You let me believe he was just gone. I let you believe he died in an accident because that was safer." "For who?" The question came out sharper than Caleb intended. The woman flinched. "For everyone." The words hung in the room. Elara watched Caleb. The anger in his face was not just anger, it was pain. Because suddenly, everything he believed about the past was changing. The death he had accepted, the guilt he had carried, the grief he had lived with. All of it was being questioned. Caleb opened the journal. The first page contained only one sentence, written in Daniel's handwriting. "If they found this, it means I was right." Caleb turned the page. Then another. Then another. His expression grew darker with every line. Elara stepped closer. "What does it say?" Caleb looked up, and for the first time since she met him, his voice sounded completely broken. "It says my brother knew he was going to die." Nobody spoke. The mountains outside were silent. The wind moved against the windows, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the ranch, someone was watching. Because Daniel Hart's secrets were no longer buried, and the people who had buried them were beginning to realize, Caleb Hart was digging. Caleb stared at the journal in his hands, unable to move. For 3 years, he had replayed the same night over and over in his mind. The storm, the argument with Daniel, the last words he had spoken to his younger brother. "You always think you can fix everything." He had carried those words like a punishment. He had convinced himself that Daniel's death was the result of his own anger, his own failure, his own inability to protect the person who mattered most. But now, standing in the quiet farmhouse with Elara beside him and the truth waiting inside an old leather journal, Caleb realized something that frightened him more than any enemy outside his door. He might have spent 3 years mourning a lie. Slowly, he opened the journal again. Daniel's handwriting filled every page. Notes, names, dates, records, everything his brother had discovered before his death. The deeper Caleb read, the darker his expression became. Elara watched him carefully. "What did he find?" Caleb turned a page. "He was investigating the mining company. The one you mentioned?" "Yes." "And?" His jaw tightened. "They weren't just bribing officials." Evelyn Cross lowered her eyes. Caleb looked at her. "What else?" The woman sighed. "Your brother discovered they were forcing families off their land." Elara's face changed. "By threatening them." "Sometimes," Evelyn said softly. "Sometimes by making their lives impossible until they had no choice but to leave." Caleb looked back at the journal. Daniel was going to expose them. Yes, and they killed him. Nobody answered, because everyone knew. Some truths did not need to be spoken aloud. They simply existed. Elara looked at Caleb. "What are you going to do?" For a moment, he looked exactly like the man she had first met. The man who carried everything alone. The man who believed pain was something to hide. But then he looked at the journal, at Daniel's words, at the evidence his brother had died trying to protect. And something changed. "I'm going to finish what he started." Evelyn immediately shook her head. "No." Caleb looked at her. "No. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. They will come after you. They already have. They will hurt anyone close to you." The room became silent, because that sentence struck something inside him. "Anyone close to you." His eyes moved toward Elara, and for a brief moment the fear returned. Not fear for himself, fear for her. Elara saw it, and this time she stepped forward. "Caleb," he looked at her. "You cannot spend your entire life running from the possibility of losing someone." His expression softened. "I know what happens when I don't." "No," she shook her head gently. "You know what happens when someone chooses to hurt another person. That is not the same thing." He looked away. She continued. You protected me before I even mattered to you." His eyes returned to hers. "You gave me a home when everyone else saw me as a problem." Her voice became quieter. "But you have to understand something." "What?" "I am not here because I need saving." The words settled between them. "I am here because I choose to stand beside you." Caleb looked at her for a long time. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that maybe love did not always lead to loss. Maybe sometimes it led to strength. The following days changed everything. The journal contained enough information to expose the mining company, but Caleb knew powerful people rarely surrendered easily. They needed proof that could not be ignored. They needed witnesses. They needed the truth told by the people who had been silenced. And Elara became the person who helped them find those voices. She visited families living beyond the valley, families who had lost farms, families who had been threatened into silence. At first, they were afraid. Everyone was. Fear had controlled Blackridge Hollow for years. But Elara understood fear. She did not shame people for having it. She listened. She sat with them. She reminded them that being afraid did not mean they were weak. Slowly, people began speaking. And slowly, the town began changing. The same people who once whispered about Elara began seeing her differently, not because she became someone else, because they finally saw who she had always been. One afternoon, Elara walked through town, carrying a basket of medicine, when she heard voices behind her. She turned. The women who had once mocked her stood outside the dress shop. The same women who had judged her before knowing her. The same women who had made her feel unwelcome. For a moment, Elara prepared herself for another insult. But instead, the oldest woman stepped forward. Her name was Margaret Hale. "We owe you an apology." Elara said nothing. Margaret looked uncomfortable. "I spent years believing I knew people just by looking at them." She glanced down. "I was wrong." The other women nodded quietly. Elara felt something strange. Not victory, not satisfaction. Something gentler. Healing. "I appreciate that," she said. And she meant it. Because Elara had learned something important. Forgiveness was not pretending people had never hurt you. It was refusing to let their cruelty decide who you became. But the people behind the mining company were not ready to surrender. One night, a fire broke out near the edge of Caleb's ranch. It was not an accident. Everyone knew. Caleb rushed outside with a bucket of water, but Elara was already there, helping move supplies away from the flames. "Elara," she turned. "I'm fine. You could have been hurt." "So could you—" He stared at her. "You always do that." "Do what?" "Act like your life matters just as much as everyone else's." She looked at him. "Because it does." The simple answer silenced him. Because that was the lesson he had needed to learn. Elara did not need permission to matter. Neither did he. Together, they saved what they could. But the fire left a message. A warning. Someone wanted them afraid. Instead, it made them stronger. The final confrontation came weeks later. The evidence Daniel collected was presented before officials from outside the territory. The mining company leaders arrived confident. They believed money would protect them. They believed fear would silence everyone. They were wrong. Because one by one, the witnesses came forward. The families, the workers, the officials who finally admitted the truth. And finally, Caleb Hart. He stood before the hearing holding Daniel's journal. "My brother died because he believed the truth mattered," Caleb said. The room was silent. "For 3 years, I believed I failed him." He paused. "But I understand now that Daniel did not need me to carry his guilt." His eyes moved over the people watching. "He needed me to carry his courage." Elara stood nearby, and she saw something she had never seen before. Caleb was not fighting his past anymore. He was honoring it. The evidence was enough. The men responsible for Daniel's death and the corruption throughout the valley were arrested. Blackridge Hollow changed slowly. Real change always did. But it changed, and so did Caleb. Months later, spring arrived in the mountains. The snow melted. Flowers appeared along the hills, and the Hart Ranch became something it had not been in years. A home. Not just a house, a real home. The kitchen was always warm. The windows were always open. There was always food on the table. And there was always laughter, especially from Elara. She stood outside one morning, watching Caleb repair a fence while the sun warmed the valley. "You know," she called, "when we first met, I thought you were the most stubborn man I had ever seen." Caleb looked up. "And now," she smiled. "Now I know I was right." He laughed, a real laugh, the kind she had rarely heard from him before. She walked toward him. "And you? What about me?" "What did you think when you first saw me?" Caleb considered. "That you were carrying too much." Elara raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like an insult." "It wasn't. What was it?" He stepped closer. "That you had spent your whole life carrying things nobody else should have asked you to carry." Her expression softened. "And now?" He gently took her hand. "Now I know you were never meant to carry them alone." Years ago, Elara Voss had walked into Blackridge Hollow, believing she was searching for a place where she could survive. She had spent her life being told she was too much. Too different, too difficult, too impossible to love. But the truth was never about becoming smaller so the world would accept her. The truth was that she needed to find people who were brave enough to see her completely. Caleb Hart had thought protecting someone meant keeping them away from danger. Elara taught him that true protection meant standing beside someone while they faced it, and together they built something stronger than a perfect life. They built an honest one, a life filled with scars, forgiveness, laughter, and love. Because sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the person who changes everything. Sometimes the heart that has been hurt the most becomes the heart that heals others. And sometimes, after years of feeling like you do not belong anywhere, you find a place where someone finally looks at you and says, "You were never too much. You were always enough."